The storm clawed at the mountain cabin as if it wanted to rip the walls apart. Wind screamed through cracks, shaking shutters loose from rusted nails. Snow sprayed like shards of glass across the porch. At the door, a German Shepherd mother braced herself against the gale, her fur crusted with ice, ribs trembling under the weight of survival. Between her legs, a pup no bigger than a mitten sagged, its chest stuttering shallow breaths. Jacob Morgan, Marine turned hermit, crouched inside, breath fogging the glass. His instincts screamed not to break the rule, never open to the wild. But his eyes dropped to the porch boards, where tracks blurred in snow. Not just paw prints, something heavier. A single boot tread, sharp, recent, overlapping his own from hours earlier. The storm hadn't brought only her. He counted heartbeats, 4 inside, 1 outside, and 1 waiting in the dark. Inside, heat bled weakly from the potbelly stove, a fragile heartbeat of iron against endless cold. The pup lay half-curled on a wool blanket, its body limp as if drifting between this world and another. Jacob pressed his ear close, trained from war to measure life by breath cadence. 2 faint rasps, then silence, then 1 more gasp like thin smoke. The others huddled tight, alive but trembling. His hand rested on the door latch, every nerve alive to the wind that wanted inside. He could feel the presence out there, not moving, not approaching, simply existing beyond sight. Snow hissed through the crack of the sill, spiraling into the cabin like icy fingers. For years he had trained himself to keep count, breaths, sounds, heartbeats. Now he marked them like a soldier again. 4 lives inside the circle of warmth, 1 outside in the dark, and 1 too close, too human.
The cabin creaked like a ship under siege. Jacob's eyes fixed on the latch, and memory dragged him backward into deserts where silence carried more threat than gunfire. Afghanistan, where doors never opened unless you were ready to lose everything behind them. The rule had been etched into him there, sharpened by nights of counting seconds between distant noises. Never open, never feed wild creatures certainty. Yet tonight, the rule felt like armor strangling his chest. The pup's shallow breaths were a metronome of urgency, reminding him that mercy often demanded defiance. Snow pressed harder against the windows, flattening the horizon into a single sheet of white. He could hear his mother's voice from long ago, soft but firm. "Help is a fire you share." The words ghosted through him, heavy as any command. The storm raged, the latch waited, and the rule began to crack under mercy's weight. The shepherd mother stood in profile against the snowlight, amber eyes steady, posture carved with endurance. Her coat bore frost like armor, each hair crusted to silver, her chest angled forward to block the gale from her shivering brood. One ear bore an old tear, scar tissue frozen stiff. Hunger carved hollows in her flanks, yet her body held the authority of a fighter. Not a beggar, not broken, but something trained, disciplined, watchful. She did not scratch, whine, or beg entrance. She simply stood, waiting, eyes locked on the man inside. Jacob saw in her stance a reflection of men he once followed, leaders who carried more weight than their bones allowed. This was not wilderness stumbling. This was intent. A decision had been made out there in the blizzard, and now it demanded a matching one from him. 2 worlds balanced on the thin seam of a door.
The potbelly stove ticked, embers collapsing with the quiet rhythm of time running out. Jacob's hand flattened against cold wood, fingers tracing grooves worn by years of storms. The rule had always held, never invite wildness inside, never feed hunger that might return. Yet the sight of ribs too sharp for the season, the sound of breath too shallow to continue, pressed against him harder than the gale itself. He remembered another winter, his mother's blanket stitched by her hands, laid across his shoulders as she whispered that help was a fire you share, never diminished by the passing. He felt that blanket's weight again, ghost-like across his back. The storm clawed with merciless hands, The pups shivered as though tomorrow might not exist, and Jacob, soldier of rules, chose to break one. The latch lifted, the door eased wider, the storm's knife cut inward, and with it came mercy. The smallest pup lay limp against wool, heat coaxing faint life back into its brittle body. Jacob rubbed brisk circles over the chest, coaxing blood to move, coaxing spirit to remember. After a frozen eternity, a paw twitched, then another, as if memory of life re-entered muscle. The cabin air thickened with fragile presence, as though the house itself had begun breathing again. But mercy never comes alone. When Jacob rose, boots creaking on old boards, his eyes caught a shape on the porch, half buried in fresh snow. Not driftwood, not debris. 2 rabbits, laid side by side, their fur still steaming faintly from warmth, necks punctured cleanly by precise teeth. Not torn, not scavenged, killed deliberately. An offering or a warning, placed like a gift at the threshold. The storm whipped across them, but the placement remained exact, symmetrical, not random chance. Someone, or something, had delivered them.
The rabbits lay pristine, their eyes glazed, bodies stiffening under the cold, yet their wounds were surgical. Not the ragged work of hunger, but clean efficiency. Jacob crouched at the doorframe, studying the symmetry with a soldier's suspicion. He knew the language of offerings, from Afghan children leaving bread at forward posts to insurgents planting false tokens before an ambush. Nothing given in a storm came without intention. The shepherd mother's amber gaze flickered toward the rabbits once, then back to him, unblinking. Snow dusted the porch in restless eddies, covering and uncovering the gift like a hand shuffling cards. The cabin, once secure, now felt like a stage, a place marked for exchange. Jacob scanned the tree line through whiteout haze, ears tuned to the unnatural silences between gusts. The offering meant connection, but to who? To her, testing his response, or to someone else watching, waiting for his next move? The wind shifted, carrying with it the crunch of boots. A figure emerged, scarf tight, snow clinging to wool, breath trailing like smoke. Lucy Hale, wiry from years of ranch work, her presence steady as mountain rock. She stepped into the glow of firelight, eyes widening at the sight of pups curled against Jacob's mother's blanket. Her hands carried a small jar, glass fogged from warmth against her chest. Honey. She knelt without hesitation, her movements careful, offering sweetness to the smallest mouth. A flicker of tongue, weak but insistent, answered. Breath steadied. The cabin inhaled new life. The shepherd mother's eyes tracked every motion, but her body shifted just enough to allow it. In that moment, human and animal aligned in purpose. Outside, the storm clawed for entry, furious at the fragile warmth forming within. But Honey's golden thread had stitched another bond across the circle of survival.
As Lucy warmed stiff hands by the stove, Jacob's eyes caught glint under the melting drift on the porch. He stepped outside, boots sinking, storm slicing across his face. In the shallow pool of thaw near the rabbits lay a shard of metal, edges jagged, half-tarnished. He lifted it, fingers brushing ice from its surface. Faint letters etched into brass emerged. S-A-R-L. The rest lost to fracture. Search and rescue? Something official, once carried on a collar. He turned it in his palm, the storm howling louder as if to drown the thought. Behind him, the mother stood at the threshold, amber eyes steady, watching the shard as if she recognized its weight. Snow thickened, swallowing prints, erasing evidence, but the fragment burned hot in his cold grip. This was no feral stray stumbling into his door. This was a trained life, torn from purpose, carrying history in her silence. The cabin filled with warmth, then turned on itself. Smoke thickened, curling black along the ceiling beams. Jacob spun to the stove, iron belly groaning under fire, but the draft no longer carried upward. The chimney coughed, spat sparks backward, smoke belching into the room. He dropped low, instinct snapping awake. Sabotage. He shoved the damper open, heat clawing his face, but the pull stayed wrong. Outside, the storm roared, masking footsteps, covering sound. He yanked the door open, wind blasting in. His eyes shot upward. The chimney cap tilted 30 degrees, frost-rimmed, but fingerprints smeared through soot in looping arcs. Someone had climbed his roof in the night, twisting iron just enough to choke his lifeline. Smoke licked down his throat, his chest seizing, the pups whimpering under sudden shadow. The storm had been weaponized, and someone out there knew how to turn heat into suffocation.
Smoke thinned, but memory thickened. Jacob crouched near the window, lungs scraping, ears straining past the storm. Afghanistan returned in sound and silence. He remembered nights when the desert went too quiet, when the hum of insects died in a blink, when men held their breath knowing a trap waited in the stillness. The storm outside now carried the same wrong rhythm. Each gust felt like cover for steps, each pause like a hunter's breath. His scar near the temple pulsed, phantom ache of shrapnel memory. He had sworn solitude, chosen silence as penance, but silence had come hunting him anyway. The pups rustled weakly, their tiny noises like radio static from another world. He listened harder, body taut as bowstring, measuring storm against instinct. In every creak of timber, every cough of wind, he heard the echo of war, the patience of enemies who could wait longer than flesh. The shepherd mother shifted, lifting her paw from the floorboards. Jacob's eyes caught the detail. Not just cracked pad from ice. Embedded in her fur, faint streaks of hardened blue, flaking like dried paint. He knew that shade, industrial, common on kennel doors, city impound fencing, places where animals waited behind bars. She wasn't wild-born. She had known human thresholds, human commands, human abandonment, and she had carried that history through the storm to his door. The shard of brass in his pocket pressed heavier against him. Pieces of a puzzle aligning, offering rabbits, scarred ears, paint-flecked paw. She hadn't wandered lost. She had been made to wait, to endure, to guard. He saw the truth in her stance now, watchful but never pleading. She wasn't testing him, she was testing his door. Outside, the storm screamed hollow, but inside, a deeper question pressed against the walls. Who had trained her?
Snow shifted in veils across the tree line, bending trunks, snapping branches like bones. For a moment, Jacob thought the storm was playing tricks again, but then his eyes locked on a darker shape, upright, narrow, motionless. Half hidden in swirling white, a silhouette too still to be nature. Wind curved around it, but it did not sway. He froze, body coiling in old readiness, eyes narrowing through frost-glazed glass. The figure lingered at the edge of visibility, close enough for recognition, far enough to remain faceless. He felt its gaze thread through the white, piercing cabin walls as surely as a rifle scope. The mother stiffened, her ears spearing forward, amber gaze aligned with his. She had seen it too. Snow hissed across the boards, covering fresh prints, but the impression of presence remained. The storm pressed harder, a curtain shielding something that had no intention of leaving until it was done. The knock was deliberate. Not the tentative scratching of claws, not the storm's frantic percussion. 3 weighted raps, spaced with certainty. Jacob unbarred the latch an inch, storm slicing into his face. A man stood framed in snowlight, narrow frame wrapped in wool, hood iced, eyes sharp and pale. He stepped in with casual ease, stamping boots, shaking frost from his coat. His gaze did not settle on stove or shelter. It locked instantly on the pups curled near the blanket. His stare lingered too long, measured too clinically. The shepherd mother rose, bristled, body a shield.
Jacob's eyes tracked every twitch of the man's shoulders, cataloging posture, threat. The air thickened with more than smoke, with tension that smelled of sweat and metal. The storm roared behind, but inside, silence pressed heavier. The intruder leaned on politeness, but his stare carried hunger, not for warmth, but for something alive within the room.
Wind surged as the door trembled. Against it, two small shapes collapsed inward, half buried in drifts. Pups, but not hers, their coats darker, patches of sable streaked with frost, ribs skeletal, eyes glazed. They staggered weakly, then folded at the threshold. Jacob's gut tightened. The shepherd mother surged forward, nosing them urgently, licking ice from their faces, pressing them toward warmth. No hesitation. They were not her blood, yet she claimed them with ferocity, guiding them into the cabin. 6 small lives now huddled against the wool, indistinguishable in need. The man's pale eyes flicked sharper, narrowing with recognition, as if this detail mattered to him more than the storm. Jacob's breath slowed. She wasn't merely a survivor protecting her litter. She was a gatherer of strays, a rescuer of the abandoned, enlarging her circle against the storm. The room thickened with revelation. The threat had grown, and so had the bond. Lucy's eyes, gray and steady, cut toward Jacob across firelight. The intruder left under the storm's howl, his boots crunching into white. But his absence carried no relief. The cabin walls seemed thinner, the night heavier. Lucy's voice, hushed yet certain, threaded into the silence. He will return. Jacob felt the truth in it. The man's eyes had been too precise, his presence too deliberate. Predators never announced themselves once. They tested boundaries, retreated, then circled back. Jacob checked the latch, slid the bar, but knew wood and iron were frail against intention. The pups whimpered, their tiny bodies shifting closer against fur and wool. The shepherd mother remained rigid, her ears pitched toward the storm, as though tracking something beyond sight. Outside, snow pressed deeper, blanketing tracks. But the absence of marks was its own warning. In war, the quiet before dawn was never rest, it was preparation.
At first light, Jacob stepped onto the porch, boots cracking ice, lungs seared by sub-zero air. Snow lay heavy, yet the surface near tree line broke wrong. He crouched, brushing drift aside, revealing loops of steel. Snares. Half buried, waiting for pause, one still warm from disturbance. The frost melted in a circle where human hand had brushed moments before. Not random, not old, but freshly set. His stomach clenched. He had tracked traps before, seen the damage left in desert alleys and mountain passes, knew the precision of men who harvested suffering like resource. The pups stirred behind him inside, their cries carrying faint into the air, fragile yet loud enough for hunters to follow. The shepherd mother pressed against the doorway, eyes narrowing at the metal glint. The storm had not delivered her to him by chance. She had fled a trap line, carrying its evidence in her very paws. The storm dipped into unnatural silence, the kind that spoke of intention. Then it came, thin, piercing through the hush. 2 sharp notes, spaced exact, like a whistle cutting snow. The shepherd mother froze, ears spiking, muscles taut. Her head turned toward the sound with the precision of recognition. Not alarm, not confusion, memory. Jacob's pulse slammed. He had heard such tones before, in deserts where handlers recalled dogs through chaos. It was command disguised as signal. The pups stirred uneasily, noses twitching. The mother did not move toward it, but her ears refused to lower. The whistle cut again, the cadence too practiced to be storm accident. Beyond the tree line, silence swallowed it whole, but the message lingered. She was being summoned. Jacob's scar throbbed, his soldier's memory piecing fragments together. The storm carried more than wind tonight. It carried orders meant for ears trained to obey.
Jacob leaned against the frost-choked window, eyes narrowing against snow veils. The cadence repeated in his head, a rhythm etched from deployments, from nights watching handlers work canines across wire. The shepherd mother's body spoke truth his ears confirmed. This was recall, training signal. She had been owned, commanded, used, and now someone wanted her back. His hand slid to the brass shard in his pocket, the fragment cold, letters faint beneath his thumb. SARL, Search and Rescue, Volunteer Fire Department. It was no coincidence. She hadn't stumbled from wilderness. She had escaped a leash. Outside, the storm swallowed tracks, but the logic pressed sharp. She had been a partner once, and her handler had turned hunter. Jacob's chest tightened. He had known men who broke from loyalty, twisting skills into predation. The whistle meant claim, but her stance by the door meant refusal. The storm had carried betrayal here. By lantern light, Jacob scraped soot from the brass shard, uncovering letters one by one. SAR, Leadville, VFD, Canine. The name struck like ice in his chest. Search and Rescue. She had once belonged to this very county, trained to find the lost in snowdrifts and fire ruins, a servant of survival, now standing frostbitten at his threshold. She had not wandered lost, she had chosen. She had sought human doors until one opened. Jacob turned the fragment in his palm, the storm's moan fading as the revelation solidified. She was not merely seeking shelter, she was fulfilling training, her instinct to deliver, to protect, to bring the lost home. Her pups were not just hers, they were rescues she had gathered from snares and snow. The circle widened again, not of blood, but of duty. And the hunter who whistled for her knew exactly what kind of dog he wanted back.
Night pressed thick when the knock came again, weighted with demand. The door opened to reveal the narrow man, snow-crusted on his coat, eyes sharp as glass. His voice carried no courtesy now, only claim. The pups were his, he said, property by right. The words slithered into the cabin, sour as smoke. Jacob felt every muscle coil, soldier's instinct rising. The shepherd mother growled low, body taut as drawn bow, amber eyes searing into the intruder. The pups whimpered under her frame, their fragile chorus of survival, suddenly a bargaining chip in someone else's mouth. Jacob's scar burned. He knew this gaze. It was the look of men who measured life as resource, who called breathing beings assets. Outside, the storm thrashed, indifferent. Inside, the weight of ownership pressed, a threat sharper than any cold. The man's eyes lingered too long, daring challenge. His words branded theft as law. Jacob's hand slid to the rifle leaning against the wall, muscles tightening with readiness. Years of reflex urged him to chamber around, to tilt the balance of power with steel certainty. But another memory surfaced. Moments when loaded barrels escalated silence into chaos, when choice of restraint saved more lives than force. He lifted the rifle, steady, calm, but did not chamber. The click never came. His eyes stayed flat, unreadable. The shepherd mother's ears flicked toward him, catching the absence of escalation. Her growl softened to vigilance. The intruder's pale gaze narrowed, uncertain. Silence thickened, charged not with violence, but with defiance. Jacob's decision had shifted the air. In war, sometimes the strongest weapon was not pulling a trigger. Tonight, his weapon was refusal. Mercy as shield, discipline as blade. The cabin walls seemed to expand with the weight of it. Trust was preserved and the battle line redrawn.
Lucy knelt by the pups, her scarf slipping loose, fingers steady as she uncapped the honey jar once more. The smallest whimpered, nose twitching its sweetness, life tugging itself forward, one fragile lick at a time. Her movements were precise, deliberate, carried with the calm of someone who had fed calves at dawn storms, who had learned that survival was stitched from patience more than force. The shepherd mother allowed it, her gaze shifting between intruder and ally, weighing actions. Firelight licked across the jar, turning gold into sacrament. In that moment, honey became more than food. It was a covenant, a quiet shield raised in defiance of cold, hunger, and claim. The pups stilled, their breathing evening into tiny rhythms that joined the stove's hum. The intruder's eyes flicked sharp, unsettled by softness wielded like weapon. Mercy was winning ground, and Jacob felt the line between defense and grace blur. The intruder shifted, tension snapping like frozen branch. His eyes cut toward the dogs one last time, measuring, memorizing. Then, with a thin smirk, he pulled his hood, turned into the storm, and vanished into white. Jacob shut the door, slid the iron bar, the click reverberating through the cabin like a vow. But relief refused to settle. He stepped to the window, wiped frost, and his chest clenched. Bootprints. Not in retreat, but in loops, circling, etching paths like predator mapping prey. Fresh arcs carved into the snow, visible even as gusts fought to erase them. The storm had taken him from sight, but not from reach. The shepherd mother pressed tighter against her brood, her amber eyes unblinking, ears tilted toward night. The pups breathed soft against wool, unaware that their safety was only illusion. The cabin's silence thickened, not with peace, but with the certainty of a return.
As the storm gnawed the roof, the shepherd mother shifted forward, her paws planted firm between pups and door, her chest squared to face the storm's direction. It was not instinct alone, it was choice. Her body curved not only to shield her young, but to stand in parallel with the man who had lifted the latch for her. No submission, only recognition, the unspoken bond of guardians. In Afghanistan, Jacob had felt such eyes on his flank before, comrades wordlessly claiming watch. Now, in a mountain cabin, a dog born for rescue extended that same vow. 6 fragile lives pressed against warmth, but 2 guardians now stood at the door. Storm outside, predator waiting, yet the line of defense had thickened. Trust was no longer fragile. From the desk's drawer, Jacob lifted the old leather box, worn at edges, dust lining seams. Inside lay remnants of a life carried across deserts and back. Dog tags, tarnished medals, folded flag, and a collar. Brass plate dulled but legible. USMC. The memory of Duke, a shepherd who had saved men by barking seconds before detonation, pressed against him. Duke had not lived, but his collar had. Jacob carried it like a relic, a reminder of loyalty too costly to forget. Now he held it again, heavy with past and present. The shepherd mother met his gaze, amber eyes steady as if reading his intent. Slowly, he slipped the collar over her neck. She stiffened, then exhaled, lowering her head. Metal clinked soft, a benediction of belonging. Legacy passed across silence, stitched between 2 wars, 2 storms, 2 guardians. The circle was sealed not by blood, but by shared survival.
The cabin shifted. Once filled only with the creak of beams and the howl of wind, now it resonated with a new sound. Barking. Not loud, not strong, but high-pitched and unsteady, a chorus born from fragile throats. One pup yipped, another joined, then another, until 6 small voices lifted together. Their cries cracked the silence, stitched air with life. The stove hummed, fire licking brighter as if stirred by the sound. The shepherd mother curved protectively, eyes softening just enough to acknowledge this fragile eruption. Jacob sat back, the noise settling into his chest like a balm, loosening scars tight for years. The storm clawed futilely at shutters, unable to mute the chorus. It was not war cry, not warning, but declaration. The cabin, once bunker and penance, now rang with presence. Fragile, yes, but undeniable. In barking came catharsis. In sound came proof that life, once claimed, refused to surrender. Lucy straightened from the rug, her eyes traveling from pups to Jacob. Firelight traced the lines weather had carved into her face. Strength etched a loss and endurance. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not one of levity, but of recognition. She had seen men turn cabins into coffins of solitude. Now she saw one open into covenant. Her gaze lingered on the collar resting against the mother's chest, brass glinting faintly with history. She nodded once, small but firm, the kind of gesture that meant work awaited. Her presence steadied the room, balancing Jacob's haunted gravity with her quiet resilience. Outside, dawn pressed pale against the storm, but inside, alliance had taken root. Not loud, not sudden, but steady as mountain stone. Between them, pups stirred, bellies full, breaths strong. The shepherd mother exhaled, settling against warmth. The circle now held 3 guardians, woven by storm, sealed by choice.
Jacob sat near the stove, shadows cutting across his scarred face, collar gleaming faintly in firelight. The pups tumbled clumsily against one another, their tiny bodies warmed by blanket and fur, their whimpers softening into sounds of contentment. The shepherd mother curled around them, her ribs sharp, but her eyes calm. For years, Jacob had lived by rules, each one etched into him by survival, each one stripping him further from belonging. Tonight, those rules had fractured, and in their place, something older had taken root. Not doctrine, not command, covenant. His chest eased, breath deepened. Solitude cracked. The cabin no longer echoed hollow, it carried heartbeats beyond his own. He bowed his head slightly, as if confessing to firelight, sealing the vow within himself. From this moment forward, they were not strays, not burdens. They were family. The war of silence ended, replaced by the law of belonging. Morning pressed thin and brittle, light breaking sharp across mountains glazed in ice. The storm had passed, leaving silence too vast for comfort. Jacob stepped onto the porch, boots crunching frost. The world glared white, snow stretching unbroken except for one detail. At the threshold, coiled deliberately, lay wire. A snare, fresh, polished by hand, placed with precision. Not buried, not hidden, displayed. The storm had retreated, but threat had not. His eyes lingered on the metal curve, reflecting pale dawn, a message spelled in steel. Unfinished business. Behind him, pups shifted against warmth, oblivious. The shepherd mother stood in the doorway, her gaze fixed on the same coil, amber eyes unflinching. Jacob's jaw tightened, breath a white fog hanging heavy. The cabin now carried life, belonging, fragile covenant. But the world outside had written its own vow across the snow. Mercy had given him family. Danger had promised return.